You're welcome.
So I'll be sort of helping Bob out by reading the chat questions and looking for raised hands so that he can concentrate on the forestry content that he's sharing. It's been a fun 2 weeks since we last had the forestry Q&A. We collected Norway spruce cones and started a little seed bed here at the house just for fun to see if we could get those to germinate. And we finished up our beech understory control work at our woodlot in Bucksport. We've been doing some stuff around the house. So we had re-inventoried one of our woodlots a little bit ago, and we've been a little bit concerned about regeneration from deer and turkey. So I actually took the regen and mapped it out over the whole property to see where the particular problem areas were. And that was really helpful because we discovered it wasn't as bad as we had thought. And then yesterday, I had to spend all day, and in a good way, listening to our Master of Forestry student final presentations from the university. Bob went up and did some pruning and came back quite happy. So that's actually great for me because pruning is, I don't think I get as much enjoyment from it as Bob does. So we might do that a little bit more, sending him out pruning.
Pruning, I love pruning. It's like painting a house, right? You do 20 trees and you look back and you've accomplished something good, right? It's just that simple, right?
And I said it looks even better when you let someone who really enjoys pruning do all 5 acres and then you come and look at it.
Yeah,
so.
That's another story. Right?
Yeah. Anyway, so that's what we've been up to, and we just keep running into all sorts of questions while we're out there, things we want to look up once we're back, or try to puzzle over, and figured that you're probably all getting outside more and more too and running into questions. So this is good. Looking at the chat box, the first,
I just want to say something. After last session, Jim Robbins called me about that Husqvarna backpack chainsaw and asking me, he was so impressed by looking it up that he wanted to buy one. And so we chatted about that. But I also put up the video, which Jen put it up, linked it to I have a YouTube page where a bunch of these things are there. And it's already, there's a 7-minute segment of me using the saw for this beach control work that we did a couple weeks ago now. And it's now up to 49 views already. So if you want to see that saw, which is an excellent tool, it's now pretty well documented in that. Just go behind the firewall on the members page. It's right there. So I'll continue to post those things as we do it. We're about to do some weevil spraying, hopefully, if it ever warms up. I mean, we're actually in a 100-year low in terms of growing degree days. I've been tracking it. Normally we would have 36 to 40 growing degree days. By now we have 4 or something. 4. There's only 1 year that was lower than this. So if you think it's been cold, you're right. It's been really cold. We just, so things are really delayed. So we're looking at the weevil, right? That's how the weevil emerges. It senses, the warming of the forest floor and the other part of the environment they're going to feed in. Normally they'd be out by now and you could be treating them. We were planning to do it this weekend, but it's too early. You need at least 25 degree days and we've only got 6 or 4 or whatever. And the forecast is for none over the next week. And we should actually be holding this meeting tomorrow, right? Based on the weather forecast, not today, but you can't plan that ahead. So.
Well, Rich is talking.
Anyway, okay.
So the first question's from Merle, and Merle, it looks like you're pretty adept at your mute. Do you want to unmute and ask your question live so you can give some background?
Yeah, hi. I'm working with hemlock these days a little bit, and I'm looking for some good updated stocking guides for hemlock. Do you know if there's any around?
There is one stocking guide for hemlock. It's I don't think it's used all that much. It's in a very short, this is from memory, publication by the Forest Service, U.S. Forest Service, out of the Durham lab. I think the best thing for you to do is email me and I will send you the copy of the whole thing. It's not like other stocking guides in the sense that it has, this is again from memory, it doesn't, there are 2 levels on it. The B levels that we use to guide partial harvesting are for different percentages of hemlock in the stand, not for like pure hemlock, right? So like the cherry, the Allegheny hardwood guide is like that, for example.
Yeah.
Stocking guides for those of you that are not foresters are just simple graphs of basal area on the y-axis over trees per acre on the x-axis. And if you measure both of those things and plot yourself in stocking guide space relative to a reference line, you can tell how fully stocked you are. So it's an important metric of the way foresters make prescriptions. And for all kinds of reasons, for strict timber production or just canopy cover, all kinds of things they're useful for. They're not, I don't tend to use them a lot for prescriptive purposes, but they're very good at describing stands, at least among foresters. They're a common currency we have. So you find if you're a landowner, not a forester, and have a management plan, I wouldn't be surprised if you might see a stocking guide in there with your stands plotted on it. And if you don't understand it, then talk to your forester. But that's what they are. They're widely used and very valuable. Been around for a long time.
Thank you.
I put
So
his
email me, Merle. Yeah, okay.
I will.
put it in the chat box. So
Yeah.
Okay.
okay, so Merle, make sure you remute. And Mike Dan had the next question. Mike, are you comfortable unmuting and asking it?
Sure. I have a red pine plantation that was planted in '66. Forest Service tells me I've got some anosis root rot in it. Very slow spreading, not the classic patches of dead trees, but a single tree here and there. But in this last snowstorm, I lost quite a few trees tipped over, but more disturbing were trees that were snapped off below the crown. And I'm just wondering, I've started to try to read up on it, but are there any thinning strategies out there, like a group selection or something that I might do around these damaged trees to slow the spread? It just breaks my heart to think I'm going to clear cut this plantation.
Oh yeah, and of course I've been in this plantation. I know it's it's well managed, right? It's been thinned, right? Historically, multiple times.
I've taken over 30 cords of the acre off that plantation in cord equivalent.
30 cords are gone, and there must be at least that much standing.
Yeah,
right?
It's done over a cord per acre per year easily.
Yeah.
Since we planted in
Well,
56.
To be honest about it, I haven't thought much about anosis root rot in a long time. My direct experience with it is when we planted a white pine weevil resistance trial. We did lose some short sapling size trees to it. That they go from very healthy to just dead in like a year, right? It's very lethal.
Yes.
But what you're telling me is you're getting like butt rot or weakness in the root system, right? And they're toppling over from wind loads.
Yes.
Yeah, did you notice it prior to
the two things that I've noticed prior were the toppling over has been in either a big wind event like that windstorm 2 falls ago, I think.
Yeah.
Or in this last snowstorm where the crowns were just totally loaded with snow.
Yeah.
With a combination of wind. But then I have noticed very scattered at this point, individual standing dead trees that exhibit what you're talking about. They're they're healthy one year, the next year they don't look good, and the year after that they're dead.
Right. And I don't think, unfortunately, I don't know that there's a thinning strategy that's going to, within reason at least, that's going to help you much. I mean, the old treatment, of course, was that it really thrived upon decaying stumps. So when you did your past thinnings, you were supposed to treat those stumps. Remember the old borax treatment?
Yeah, and I did.
Borax. You did do that?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I think is why it's spreading slowly, or maybe spreading slower than it would have.
Yeah, I think this is one of these things like when you go to the doctor and there's no good outcome.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
There may be better outcomes than others. I think I noticed Dave Smith pointed this out to us back when I was a student, that red pine planted on harvested forested sites never was infected by root rot, right? In other words, cut over sites, but on old fields it's just lethal in some cases. And I think that can only be because the soil microfauna or flora rather, in
Yeah.
the soil, the fungi and the other things that naturally control the enosis and other destructive pathogens in the soil have no natural enemies in these old farm fields, right, that have been farmed out, right? So they're very simplified ecosystems down below the ground. So that just runs rampant without any natural controls. And I don't think once that starts, I don't know that any kind of management is particularly helpful and keep stopping the spread. You probably did the right thing with the borax, but if, but I don't know how I would, if I had that problem. You hate to in any forest management situation just be driven by salvage, right? It's just not though. It's not proactive, right? So I guess I would just tend to thin it fairly aggressively, right? From below, favoring your most wind firm trees. I mean, what you would do anyway. Whether that should be heavier, I don't know. If you've read up on it, you might know more about it than I do. Really, I don't. It's one of those old-fashioned forest pathology questions that people haven't studied in a while, I think, and you have to go back into the older literature.
Well, I'll think on it for a while. I mean, more or less, most of the stuff written on it is from the South, and it basically boils down to cut your losses in terms of silvicultural treatment. So it's it's on fairly good agricultural ground. It may be that I do a gradual conversion from pine plantation to natural species.
Yeah, I guess maybe not so gradual, right? So I guess that is the ultimate solution, is you want to probably grow back some kind of a mixed wood stand, right? So it has some hardwoods in it,
right?
Which will help.
Well, when I say gradual, I'm thinking maybe a quarter or a third of it at a time.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
Make it a viable commercial operation, and then
right.
Okay. Thanks very much, and I see a lot of other questions, and let's get them answered. I'll invite you out again.
Okay, so Robin has the next question, and Robin, are you? Oh, good. You're unmuted, so go ahead.
Oh, sorry. So I have all these invasive trees. I think they're Russian olive, and I don't know how to best to handle that.
Well, so we keep this actually on the dining room table. So when we get tired of talking to each other, we often look up invasive plants.
Yeah, autumn olive and Russian olive are different, right? So,
yeah, but in the main book, the Maine Invasive Plant Field Guide, the Maine Natural Areas Program put that out, and they list autumn olive. They don't have Russian olive, but I did a quick look. Russian olive does exist in the United States as an invasive, but I think probably it could
probably autumn olive.
Could be all autumn olive.
Yeah.
This has a ton of invasives in it, and it's great. One, it's these like glossy sheets, so you can actually take it outside and hold it up to the plants that you're looking at. And it talks about how they reproduce and the treatment methods. So for autumn olive, they say that you can pull up the smaller plants and pull the roots out when the soil is wet. So early in the season, usually, that you can cut them, but they'll re-sprout. And so you either have to keep on them, keep pulling them, keep mowing them. And then it does say that herbicides can work, both glyphosate and triclopyr. And you can do it in a couple different ways if you want to use herbicides. And then they also talk that this is one that goats and sheep will eat.
Yeah, so there's two ways to get rid of these plants. Well, mechanically, you can pull them and cut them. That takes years, and you have to be very diligent. If they're big things like, what's the diameter of the stem of these olives? What would you say roughly? An inch or bigger?
Yeah, 1 to 2.
Okay, so that's a little, you're not going to be pulling them by hand, right? So you need to cut those. And then if you really want to get rid of them quickly and expeditiously, all you need to do is put a little bit of herbicide right on that cut stump and they'll be gone, right? Don't do it now though, because this time of year, the sap flow is really high. It can spit out that treatment. Do it almost any other time. Wait till midsummer or any time during the winter. That'll be lights out and they'll be gone. So that rather than just keep cutting and cutting them. And the other thing you need to do is eventually, because because they probably are seeding in too, so they might also be in the seed bank and keep germinating. The only long-term solution is to replace it with some other vegetation that will shade out any regenerating. That's a sort of a general truism for any kind of unwanted weed species that that's interfering with some other objective. You can kill all you want, right? But you need to replace it with something better ultimately. And that means it depends. If you're in an old field situation, you probably would want to plant some kind of a tree species that would establish easily and grow well and just shade it out. So you need to do sort of two things. So, but you should, if you don't have that invasive guide, isn't that a, Tom or Jen, that's a member benefit, right? At some level. Yeah.
I was just gonna jump in.
Yeah.
I put a link to the store. It's not necessarily a member benefit. We did give new members at one point.
Okay. Yeah.
As an incentive to become a member. I don't know if we may do that again as the time of year is here for that guide. But the link to the store is on the chat, and so you can get your guide.
It's absolutely excellent. There's a one page on the ecology and the description of the plant, and then there's a page on control methods. It's just really well done. Good pictures.
Could you say again why it's not a good time right now?
Because right now the trees are actively breaking dormancy, and the sap is flowing very, high volumes, just like maple syrup, right? Out from the roots to the top of the plant, more so than it would be typical, right? It's the top of the plant rehydrates to supply the leaves that are now flushing, right, from the buds. So you get this really active sap flow for a month, beginning about now, or maybe, depending on where you are, maybe even a little earlier, through early June, mid-June. And it can just, if it's really, sometimes you cut the plant off. We just were killing all this beech, and that timing was probably not ideal there, but the flow was not particularly high, so we got the herbicide treatment on there. I think it's going to be effective. But we've done some other work where you can actually just see the sap just pushing right out of the stem, right?
Wow.
This time of year.
Thank you so much, because I was going to do it today, so thank you.
Well, you could probably try it, and if you put enough on, it'll probably kill it. But if you can wait a month, and
thank you. That was helpful. Helpful. I'm not going to ask my second question because it's this is an advance.
Oh no, we have to answer that because everybody loves
absolutely.
An outdoor fire.
Everybody loves fires. No person more than me. And I didn't burn anything that's wood, right? I don't think in a burn pile. I mean, in my wood stove, of course, I don't do that. But in an outside fire, I mean, just try to, if it's drier, the better. Obviously, if you burn just green brush, it's going to just be an awful smoke. But so anything that's been laying around, it's not too rotten. Put it on there.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, looks like Jay Hall has the next question. Jay, would you like to unmute? I think last time he had a little trouble with it, so I will read the question. When cutting in mixed wood stands with scattered mature white pine, can it be effective to clear cut around crop tree quality pines to catch some pine regeneration, regardless of the current seed crop? How wide a circle should be cut? Should the distance vary with the amount of expected hardwood competition? Without tending until the next entry in 15 years, would we just be growing cabbage pine?
That's a great question. We just looked at some gaps just of that sort about 3 weeks ago on the university forest that are about 10 years old. And I think more or less these are like 10th acre gaps. So that's the diameter of such a gap there would be about 75 feet. So about a tree height. So a gap that's in diameter, the height of the trees, with one tree in the middle, one good seed-bearing dominant tree should work great there. Now, where we did this on the demerit forest, we have very high deer populations, and it's almost like cheating because the deer will come in and just browse the raspberry and the hardwoods right out of there. so if you're growing pine and spruce and hemlock, that's a good thing. If you're trying to regenerate sugar maple or ash or something else, then that's not a good thing. So, I'm a big fan of making small to medium-sized gaps up to maybe a ½ acre, leaving retention as appropriate, light retention, seed-bearing trees, which you can just leave there forever or harvest them later once you get the regeneration, and then you go make other gaps in another part of the matrix forest. So that that would be the sort of how this would play out as a silvicultural system over time. So I guess one answer here, then, it depends on what your deer pressure is and how the higher quality of the site, the more hardwood and brush competition you're going to have. You know that, of course. And you may have to do some, mechanical cleaning to bring your pines, but the pines should germinate. It's always better to do it in a seed year, but it's not critical. Some people, pine, we've had a number of good pine seed years recently in this area. It looks like from my pruning, there was, of course, wind damage like everybody got from that awful snow. I'm looking at pine tops that are snapped out, and there are little cones all over them. Pine, as many of us know, has a 2-year seed cone cycle. Right now the cones are like maybe they're about 1 inch long. The first year cones, those will mature this year, and it looks like we're going to have a moderately decent crop in this area. Down where Merle is and other places, and it may not be the case, but you have to stay on top of that. So this would be a good year. We're planning to do some pine, fairly extensive pine, so it'd be an amount of heavy thinning, but it ends up being sort of like a shelterwood harvest as well. So I don't know whether, what was the question about should the distance vary with the amount of expected hardwood competition? I guess not. I think I'm mostly interested there in managing the shade initially. If you have a hardwood mid-story that's interfering, that's going to be a big problem, especially if it's beech or some shade tolerant thing. Even red maple, you'd want to harvest some of that if it's merchantable. If not, get rid of it because it won't work. Obviously, the pine's not going to come underneath that. So. But clearly leave the anchor of that tree in the middle or on the windward, the upwind side of the gap. And that's a good practice for sure. It works not just with pine, but almost anything that oak, especially things that have fairly short seed dispersal, like oaks, right? Oaks, of course, are moved by birds, but in general, they don't go very far, right? They end up under the tree. So, whereas pine seed blows a long distance, so you can get by with fewer pines. Okay.
Good. Okay, we're out of questions in the chat, so we either need more questions in there or you can raise your hand. Okay, Doug, be sure to unmute.
Hi, I have 2 questions that I'll throw the one that's most closest to. We have a hillside that we're going to harvest primarily for popple. It's a stratified stand. In other words, you've got many different layers, and underneath there is a lot of beech, poor quality, diseased, and poor formation and that kind of stuff. And my question is, if we don't want to get a lot more regeneration of beech, should we just leave it alone, take out what we want of mature trees and leave the beech alone, or take out some of the beech and pray? I don't know if you have any recommendations.
You going to do this work yourself, or is this a commercial timber sale?
This is a commercial timber sale.
Is the beech merchantable so you can harvest it and get paid?
Very little of it.
So it's that nasty, like sapling size stuff that isn't worth anything, but it's really interfering. Well, that's exactly what we've been attacking for years now with this backpack chainsaw. It is absolutely the perfect tool for that. And you can do, after doing 12 acres in 6 days, that's about a 6-hour work day. You do about an hour and a half of work, and you will do about a ½ acre an hour that way. So it's incredibly efficient. So you can, and we're following on, one of us saws, the other one follows along, spraying stumps with about a 20% solution of glyphosate. And that's lights out for the beech, right? We cut the stumps high. If you go on, just go watch that video that I mentioned 10 minutes ago on the members only webpage. You'll see me using the saw. And also we didn't actually demonstrate the spraying of the stumps, but you'll see it looks a little weird because we're cutting these stumps 3 feet high, which I think also helps some because that will tend the beech, even if you don't spray, I think will tend to be, if you do that, the beech will tend to form stool sprouts around, so-called, around the top of that stump in a ring, rather than root suckers, which is the big enemy, right? So you're worried naturally, and for good reason. If you cut the beech off low, all you're going to do is generate 1,000 more beech trees, right? That are going to interfere with what you want to do. So it's much better. Yeah.
Sorry, from a commercial harvest standpoint, what I'm reading is probably leave it alone unless you can get in there and do your own work.
Well, it depends on.
Well, the filler buncher could buzz them.
If you're, yeah, that's true. If you're using a feller buncher, then they could buzz off these trees, right, with the hot saw kind of a setup and just mow them off. That's a pretty crude method, and I think unless something comes back better, if you're now, if the overstory is aspen, you saying poplar?
Yes.
Quaking or big tooth?
I'm sorry, say again.
Quaking aspen or big tooth aspen? Do you know, or a mixture?
I'm not sure. I think it's a mixture.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so that would come back and outgrow the beech if you knocked it down, right? Unlike most other hardwoods wouldn't necessarily do that, but the poplar would go right back, blow right by it, and shade it out again. So if you want to grow just another crop of aspen, which is not something I would want to do, but if you want to do that, then you're probably okay.
Yeah,
just by knocking the beech, cutting the beech back as much as you can, because that won't affect the root suckering, right? Very dense beech shade might inhibit root suckering, but it would have to be pretty dense. So that's a tough silvicultural problem. You don't really, neither beech nor aspen are really money makers, right? You can harvest stands and make some money, but in the long run, you want to be growing something that's going to produce a more valuable saw log. So probably if we were facing that, we'd probably grow back some aspen. I would leave some aspen as reserve trees to inhibit some of the aspen suckering. Maybe a tree every 50 feet or 100 feet, not a lot, but a few, so that I didn't just get back a big monoculture, pure stand of aspen. Leaving those trees will inhibit the suckering from that part of the root system. But if you want some aspen back, then leave gaps as well. And in those places, that's where you'd have to knock the beech back so that the aspen would thrive. And other species would probably seed in. Now, if you're talking,
sorry, we've got some nice oak in there, which we're going to select for and leave.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially higher up the hill, but
yeah.
So that's part of our plan. Yeah.
Okay, so if you do just Jay Hall's question about the pine, the same thing would work there, right? You could harvest all the aspen around those oak trees into maybe a half-acre gaps, right?
Yeah.
The aspen will sucker, but unless you leave one or two of them, there's no reason why you couldn't leave a couple aspen in those same gaps, and that would knock the beech down in the understory. That should work out fine, and then you'd be on the way to a nicer oak mixedwood stand, I would think.
Okay. I just bought myself a 6-pound Echo chainsaw, the high-powered one. I don't know if that's what you're talking about with a backpack chainsaw, but this thing is beautiful for trail work on land trust and that kind of stuff. I love it.
Small saw. Yeah, that's good for you. This is a more expensive, elaborate device that has a frame that the saw's at the end of a pole, and it's suspended a bungee cord. Yeah, it's a little more elaborate. Very special tool for cutting off like trees up to 6 inches and doing trail work and other things like that. The beauty of it, once you see it, is that this is what Jim Robbins was just struck by, having just done trail work just with that same type of saw you're doing, is that the weight's off your arms, right? You don't you can work all day and you don't get nearly as exhausted.
My shoulders, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. You want to look at this. You're going to want one of these saws. Trust me.
I got one more question, if I can throw it in quick and let other people have. I've got a pine shelterwood question. We've got we had a harvest 2011, I guess. We've got regrowth of pine everywhere, a solid mat of 1 foot to 5 foot pine coming up. Over top of it, we have very mature pine trees. 24 to 36 inch diameter, 80 feet high, that kind of stuff. My question is, how long should we leave those in place, given their age and that kind of thing, for weevil control on the pine that's coming up? How high do you want the understory to get to first before weevil doesn't become a big problem?
So that's a 2-part question there. Normally we would say, do you want to get that we would grow pine regeneration in partial shade underneath a pine overstory until it's at least one log high, like 17 feet, right? You get that straight stem. So at least you got your butt log formed then, right? Now that's if the pine is relatively scattered and, you know, every tree is kind of precious, right? So,
Yeah.
and you want to cultivate them up there. If you've got dense regeneration like you described, you could remove all of that overstory tomorrow and they'd be fine.
Really?
They would sort out, yeah, because you've probably got, I mean, without seeing it, but I bet we've got the situation commonly and we've done it. And 10,000 pine trees per acre will immediately close crowns, and that's lights up for the weevil. Even the trees are 5 feet tall. They don't have a place to overwinter in that stand anymore because it's all shady. The weevil needs open areas in the stand, sunlit areas. Like, I mean, this is why old fields with pioneering big trees are horrible weevil situations, because the weevil is in that grass, right, and then attacks those big dominant cabbage pines every year. If you've got that dense regeneration, you want to get that growing. If it's 10 years old and only 4 or 5 feet tall, you probably would benefit from some release. I would take out probably 2/3 of the overstory is what we do on the university forest, depending on how much you left in the first place. But I mean, leave some scattered. This is a case where I rarely recommend this, but you can really cut from above here, because the real big trees are the ones that are ripe. They've served their purpose. They've created the seed that you want. They've regenerated the stand. If they're up at 30 inches, then they're getting at the point where the mills are going to have trouble with them, right? So we cut those stands from above and leave. Often you have these nice, in that kind of stand, you'd have these beautiful 18, 20-inch trees that are really well formed. They may not have great crowns, but you can leave those and they will grow, continue to grow, very high value products, not interfere really with the developing understory. So that would be my prescription for that, about some kind of partial or fairly heavy partial removal to daylight that pine. And then if it's really, really dense, you're gonna have to thin the pine even, right? The weevil is not your problem. What will happen, and this is actually what Jim Robbins called me about. This is an important question. Last time we had the thing, and I advised him to do some spacing of that pine regeneration. And then we had that awful event right after that. I mean, literally within days, that laid a lot of that pine over. You'll get, if the trees grow very dense, the ratio of height to diameter gets really out of whack. They're way too tall for their individual size. So they lean on each other, and but then you get this heavy snow mat. The thing will go over. Jim called it's like hay, a field of hay. We'll just lay over, right? And that's a horrible metaphor to think about if you've spent 15 years growing pine regeneration, right? So by thinning that regeneration, and we go to like 6 by 6 feet apart. We still leave in 1,000 trees per acre. That's way more than you want at maturity. If the weevil gets some of them at that point, it's not a big deal. So you want to give those trees more light and then thin them, I would say. Don't worry about the weevil if you've got that density.
I could keep asking questions, but if we go in there and harvest the big mature trees that were there, that will take out some of the
Yes, that's right. There's no,
with help, yeah.
with very skilled loggers, you can do that in trails about 70 feet apart and you should be okay, but it's not, you could also wipe all of it out.
Yeah, true. Thank you very much. Been very helpful.
Great.
Good, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Remember to remute yourself, Doug, and we can take a new question. We have a new guest maybe that wants to ask a question. Gabe Perkins.
Am I the new guest? All right. Hey, thanks
welcome.
Thanks for doing this, Bob and Maine Woodland owners. This is great. I do have a question, actually. This is perfect. It's about tree planting. I have an opportunity to get about 10,000 trees donated to my organization to plant on a community forest in Bethel. And I'm wondering about tree planting in general. It would be the spot I'm thinking of was clear cut in 2018. And what's coming up now is mostly grass from where they had cut. And it's northwest facing slope, it's about 300 feet of elevation drop from 1,700 feet down to about 1,400 feet. And I'm just wondering about site prep and maintenance and feasibility. should I just take the donation and say yes? I mean,
what kind of trees? Where are these trees coming from?
You get
and
to
what
pick
species?
the species? Yeah.
We get to pick. Yep,
Oh.
it's all up to us. Like whatever we want to plant. I mean, the forest was mostly hardwoods. It's coming back with a little hemlock and a little pine in spots, but it was mostly hardwood forest for a long, long time.
Mm-hmm.
Northern hardwoods.
Yep.
Well, in full disclosure here, Gabe is my son-in-law. We've actually discussed this in the past, so this was to some degree. I woke up this morning at 3:30 thinking about the question. So, and I have seen some of the property that Gabe has been instrumental in creating this wonderful Bethel community forest just outside of the town. Like a lot of these properties, it was pretty heavily cut through on a lot of it, you know, not too long before the organization acquired it. And but it's excellent land. I mean, this land ought to be growing that wonderful. Bethel to me is one of the greatest places in Maine to grow trees. It grows pine really well in the lower elevations, northern hardwoods on the hillsides, hemlock up on the, you get high enough, like you have some of the, you have spruce knoll up there, right? Nice red spruce. So the whole landscape, it just wants to grow trees. And I think some of that really heavily cut stuff has too much beech in it, right? Like we were just talking about earlier. But you say it's grass. Now grass is somewhat easier to plant in because it doesn't, you know, it will be a brutal competitor if you don't somehow shade it out around the tree. And you can, we do that with, and this gets expensive, but you can use 4x4 foot, they're called brush blankets, where you just put them down, they're like landscape fabric, where you just put in the planting hole over it, stake them down with staples, and that lights out literally for anything underneath that, right? Those cost about $1 a piece, I think. So those 10,000 trees, you're running up a bill, right?
Yep.
So short of that, I guess grass, you would want them to plant something. The planting issue is like you need to do probably some kind of preparation of the planting sites, either to remove brush that might, you know, be overtopping these planted seedlings. Then you also have to worry about deer. If for some species, right, if the deer population is high there, planting of any kind of hardwoods is just going to fail, you know, without protecting them. And now you're really talking expensive because you're putting them in some kind of tubes that, you know, $4 or $5 a piece. Okay. So that's would only be like an enrichment planting. We call it enrichment planting because you're not trying to get wall-to-wall plantation of, say, oak, right, a tree every 8 feet like you would with spruce or something. You want to get maybe 20 trees per acre scattered around out there to enrich. And there was oak. I remember seeing some oak on the property, right?
There's a lot, actually.
Beautiful oak, right? And a lot of that was hammered out. So what I would do if I could, what we've been doing is planting. Pine is a good choice. Number one, you have a really big pine sawmill not very far away. Now, who knows whether that'll be around in 50 years when you start thinning these stands, but I would bet on it. Something will be around to utilize those trees. Pine is, the thing about pine is easy to handle. It's easy to plant. It establishes well. Yes, it can get weevilled once it gets up there, but if you're just trying to restore the species, that's not a huge problem. There are ways to deal with that. So it can be high maintenance. It's relatively cheap to acquire the seedlings. So you can get more of them probably than you would for some hardwood species. I do like the oak. The third thing that I would do, especially as a community forest, you got to put out some chestnut, right? If you're going to do 10,000 trees, I'd put out at least a couple hundred chestnuts from somebody if you can get the seedlings, as sort of just a conservation practice, right? And I looked up the chestnut range this morning in the Silvics manual, and it looks like it actually, I was surprised by this. I hadn't looked at the range map. It goes clear up. Somebody estimated that the range of chestnut in Western Maine went, not to Bethel, but clear up as far as what looks like about Freiburg.
Okay.
I think I read maybe a year or two ago, they found the tallest chestnut in Maine is in Freiburg,
right.
I think.
Right.
So it'll do fine. Chestnut grows fine up here, right? Way out of the native range of it. So I think you got to do that. Try to get your hands on some chestnut seedling, and you would treat them just like the oaks, right? They're in the same family. The deer would probably eat them, although I don't know that they know what they are, but that wouldn't stop them here, I don't think. Other things like spruce. Yeah, I would, you could, on the higher elevations, you know, the thinner soils, and I'd look at red spruce, I guess, which also is easy to plant.
Yeah.
You've got a nice source of seedlings again from the New Hampshire nursery. I don't know, right? I don't know if they sell red spruce. I think they come and go on that one. You can get them other places. The oak you can get from New Hampshire, other places, other hardwoods. Sugar maple, the northern hardwoods that were there, yellow birch, those are very fussy. You're trying to plant those, that's not gonna work out as well, I don't think. You know, it depends on, planting 10,000 trees is a real project. That's not like a weekend job, right? Especially for me and you, if we go do it.
So is it, yeah, mechanical versus volunteers? I mean, it's a big volunteer army. I mean, we would have to.
Yeah. Well, as long as you've got planting tools, you can get a lot done with a crew of 10 people, right? Plant 100 trees a day and pretty soon you're done.
Yeah.
But in planting technique, everything is important. Planting trees is a real fussy proposition. You have to handle the planting stock very carefully. Don't let it get dried out, because then it's dead, right? But don't oversaturate it. I mean, there's just a lot of logistical issues with a proper planting technique. And I don't know, there probably are consultants. I know Rennie Knoll down there in Wyndham, who works in your area, does a lot of contract planting. It might be worth considering hiring somebody like that that's connected to the ability to get laborers, right, that are skilled planters. I wouldn't know how to do that here, but I know foresters who could, and because we do all of our own work and we don't do something on this scale. But
I think that's the logistics of it, is you're gonna, when they pull the seedlings out of the ground, you need to get them back into the ground as soon as possible. So if you're planning, you know, with the community forest, use volunteers, it's not like you can spread it out over 3 Saturdays.
Right.
You really need to do it when they're available and not wait. So certainly you'd want a volunteer component, but you might need, and it needs to be flexible labor. So like the seedlings are ready now.
Yep.
Crew needs to show up in a week.
Yep.
And you know, guess what? Today would be planting on a day like today, at least here, it's very sunny and windy. It's like a high fire danger probably still in some places. Those are bad days to plant trees because the roots dry out very quickly. Tomorrow, the crappiest day, you know, we're going to have in the Maine, would be a wonderful day to go out and plant trees, right? From a tree standpoint, it wouldn't be a good day for the workers, but the trees would love it, and they would establish well. You know, they settle in. They need that moisture, right, to establish their roots in the mineral soil. At the very least, when you're planting, you want to scout back with some kind of a planting tool to any sod that's right around where you're going to plant the tree for a couple feet, right? That takes time. So that's why when you're planting bare root planting stock like this, it's not like, say, Irving would plant 2,000 trees a day or more when they're planting just little plug seedlings in northern Maine. Jess and I plant 200 trees in a day with a shovel, and we're tired, right, at the end of the day. So 200 times what?
But we would never hire ourselves, so that's an important factor. But I think it relates to what Doug was bringing up too, about doing your own work, and it is a real, this sort of non-commercial work and labor to get it done is a bit of a problem. And because you have to pay for it, and there are the NRCS cost share programs, but the timing on those are often, you need to be planning 1 and 2 years ahead of time, and life doesn't often work that way. And then the other is just the availability of labor. So while we haven't done it, what my strategy would be is that there are these foresters who do have these sorts of things. So in central Maine, Rob Nelson has a crew that is able and flexible to do stuff like this. There's down east, I've heard of some as well, Rennie Noel. So to me, it shows the importance of having a consulting forester, having a well-connected consulting forester, or at least relationships with foresters to use that network when you do need something like this done.
That's great general advice. Yeah,
that's great.
Okay, Jay's got a new question here. Any new research on light needs for white pine seedlings? The old rule was more than 10 to 20% full sun for survival, 45% full sun for max growth. Here in central Maine, shade control becomes a balancing act between weevil and blister rust?
Good question. And we have studied that. About 10 years ago, I had a student that looked at this, and we haven't published this yet, but where we compared pine to other species. 10 to 20% is a good number for survival. Pine is sort of intermediate in shade tolerance, needs some light. Not when it's initially germinating. White pine grows actually very slowly for its first 3 or 4 years, and then just takes off and zooms out of the ground. And that's at that point where they would really begin to thrive at light levels higher than 45%. They don't, there's this light saturation curve, right? So as light goes up, the question is, do trees respond to that increased light or don't they? White pine will respond to that almost over the full gradient, right to full sun. But you properly raised the question, once you get to a certain point, now you've created a situation where the weevil will now have the habitat that we were just talking about earlier to attack those terminals. And so the real balancing act there is where what the weevil is responding to is not directly to the sun, although they do need sunny spots in the stand to overwinter, but they're responding to the diameter of the terminal shoot of the pine seedling. So the perfect pine cultural system is to grow the pine under partial shade, and 45 to 50% is probably a good number for that under a uniform shelterwood, so that you get the height growth is realized, but the diameter growth of that shoot is spindlier than what you would get in the full sun. The diameter is what the weevil needs for its life cycle. The larvae need that thick cambial layer to survive. So so if you're planting in gaps, that gets a little trickier. Which is what we've been doing. We planted pine in gaps. You've seen some of them on a Mariahville property, and some of those are now up 6 feet, and they're starting to get attacked by weevil because they're very vigorous, right? They're getting almost full sun in their little spot in the gap. Not all of them, but so we're going to try to spray those. So
good, and we probably have time for one more question, and it looks like it's come from Chip Bessie. What's the most effective chemical for spraying weevil? Use a sticker with it.
I'll show you what I've concluded. This is
because everybody has this in their living room, right?
Yeah, right. A jug of Talstar, right, which is bifenthrin. This is a fairly dilute, 7.9% bifenthrin. If you read up on the weevil, this is a general insecticide that you can buy without being a licensed applicator. That's good for all kinds of things, termites, any kind of pests that you're going to spray it on, and you use it in a pretty dilute solution. You wet down the leaders of the pine trees, beginning about right now. Talstar is a brand of bifenthrin. There are others. And I don't know. I've asked Ron LeMen who runs a pesticide application company, friend of mine, about using stickers with it, and I have no experience with that. You would think that would certainly be desirable, so that it wouldn't wash off.
So that sticker is surfactant?
It's not a surfactant. No, it's a thing that keeps the chemical in the insecticide just literally stuck to the where you're applying it, okay. So it doesn't wash off. Okay. Of course, it can clog up. You don't use too much; it clogs up your sprayer. So I'm still actively researching that. I don't know what you would use, so we may end up spraying it without that. And again, we're planning to do it this weekend, but it looks like we haven't had enough warmth yet for the weevil. The weevil has to be out and active, otherwise I guess, or right before, if you spray right before the weevil comes out, it's a contact, right? It's going to ingest this and die. But it's almost better if your weevils are just emerged and they've migrated up to the leader and are feeding. Then you can nail them directly with the spray. That's the ideal regime. And some people recommend actually spraying twice, like as soon as you can, like with 25-degree days, and then maybe later on at 100. But I've never done this before, so we'll see. I did buy a new sprayer. My old sprayer is using nothing but herbicide, and I didn't dare try to clean that. So that's, I just picture myself out there spraying these pine leaders. Why are they all dying? It's good I didn't clean my glyphosate out of my sprayer. That would be bad. So we got a new sprayer.
So one thing is for these the herbicides, insecticides, if you're spraying it on your own land and not receiving payment for it, and it's not a restricted chemical, you don't need a license to do it. And that generally, we largely are using just a small amount of glyphosate on beech and things like that. So we didn't need a license, but I felt like I wanted to know more because it is somewhat, you know, people do object to using herbicides and things like that. So one of the things I did this winter was get my private pesticide applicator license. So you take you study for and then take a general exam, and that's one level. And then for the private applicator, you have to specialize in something. And I did the forestry exam for that. And well, I probably won't, so the private pesticide license allows me to buy restricted chemicals. That might come in handy if we decide to treat our town ash trees for emerald ash borer. But for the most part, I won't use it. What I did, I learned a ton about proper use of various pesticides and things to think about, how to research these different things, how to read the labels, how to research what the minimum amount to use is in order to get an effective response and things like that. So if you're looking, I like studying and getting certificates. So if you're like that, and even if you don't plan on using it, I think it cost $15 to get the license.
Yeah.
You might really enjoy learning about it and being a more wise user of chemicals, even if it's just something like glyphosate that you can buy at Home Depot or Tractor Supply.
Right.
We are out of time. So Jen, do you want to take back over?
Yeah, sorry about that.
Quick question, was the Telstar got an FMC manufacturing label on it?
It's sold by FMC, yeah.
Yeah, okay. I worked for them for 20 years in that division and left in 1986, and Telstar was just in the system, just starting in the system at that point in time.
Yeah.
How about that?
I have a memory throwback there.
We should let you answer the question then. You're salesman. All right. All right.
All right. I have put in the chat a link to our events page so everybody can see what the next, all the next events we're having. Tomorrow being the next one with legacy planning at 9 a.m. So you still have time to register if you're interested. Thank you everyone for attending, and thank you Bob and Jessica once again for being our Car Talk, forestry version of Car Talk. You're way more attractive than Click and Clack, and probably more harmonious than Click and Clack.
We'll have to work on that, I guess.
Yeah, so I'm hoping you'll do this again. And like always, and we'll let everybody know if there's a June version of Fireside Forestry. I don't know if we'll have fires going by June.
I sure hope not by then.
It's supposed to snow tomorrow.
Let's get
I saw a forecast for some snow up north and west, so it's not over yet. And like always, Bob, you're open to having emails with questions?
Absolutely, yeah.
Now and the next time you're on. So Jessica's posted Bob's email. And like I said, I've posted a link to our events. And please also email me if you have any questions about Maine woodland owners. And we love giving advice as well. We got Tom Doak and Harold Burnett on staff who are ready to help everybody with their questions. So thank you everyone for being here, and have a great weekend and stay safe and get outside.
Thank you for doing this.
Yep. Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Very much.
Yeah,
Take
thanks.
care.
Take care.
Bye-bye all.